king was in real danger of dying. Critodemos had to summon all the skills Greek surgery had accumulated.
We approach war wounded nowadays in what's called an ABC approach, airway, breathing, circulation. They would have approached it in much the same way. Maybe they wouldn't have concentrated on the airway, but they certainly understood hemorrhage.
According to legend, Alexander stayed calm and in control all through the operation. But somehow, Professor Ryan doubts that.
I can't imagine that he could have sat there and controlled himself, no matter how brave he was. This is someone taking a knife to your chest wall. It must have been, first of all, terrifying. And secondly, it must have been extremely painful.
Alexander's faithful general, Ptolemy, later king of Egypt, said, "His breath as well as his blood spouted from the wound."
The description here is of the air and blood leaking suggests this was a wound into the lung. Some people might say, oh, I bet it didn't penetrate the chest. Well, it did, because that's a very clear description of a penetrating injury into the lung, escape of air. This is what is now called an open chest wound or sucking chest wound. Let me just give you an example. When you have a sucking chest wound and you try and breathe in, only some of the air goes down there. Air will now go in through this hole. So you have extremely inefficient ventilation, and that's one of the ways you die. Without probably knowing why, just applying his basic good first principles, the surgeon will have just covered the wound, probably to control hemorrhage, but in so doing, he stops the open chest wound sucking further. And in so doing, he saved his life.
For the wound to heal, Critodemos would have had to stitch muscle, tissue, and skin separately. These are the basic skills of the modern plastic surgeon, and they were brought back home from the battlefields.
What they would have brought back to the cities of that time was to take back a knowledge that wounds require to be cleaned, laid open, dressed, splintered, and allowed to heal.
Alexander's new empire, for the first time, connected the west to the east and the south. The inquiring minds of the Greeks now had access to the rich medical traditions of Egypt and India, of the great physician Carr, and of Sushruta, India's first plastic surgeon.
Well, Alexander, of course, opens the world up considerably. He marks a point at which we go far to the east, and I think India ceases to be sort of a magical land, and some aspects of Indian medicine are coming across.
Precisely what the Greeks brought back from India isn't certain, but surgical knowledge did advance rapidly at about this time. All learning did. This is Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. 23 centuries ago, this was virgin land, selected by Alexander as his Egyptian capital. Alexander's successor as ruler here, his general Ptolemy, was determined to make Alexandria the most important city in the Greek world.
It became a great center of science in the Greek world, and I think this is one reason why medicine there could flourish.
Ptolemy sent agents all over the Greek world to acquire new texts, and visiting ships were obliged by law to leave their manuscripts to be copied. As Alexander himself had wished, a great library was built to house them all. Over half a millennium, the library gathered together some 700,000 volumes, including the most comprehensive body of medical texts in ancient history. Thanks to the great library, the development and teaching of scientific knowledge flourished as never before.
Hippocratic medicine is very interesting, its surgery is intriguing, but when we see Celsus's text appear, we have a much more developed medicine and a much more developed surgery. Now, what's happened in the meantime? Alexandria has happened in the meantime. You have the museum open up. The Ptolemies are very liberal in their support of all sorts of research endeavors, medicine, literature, everything. For a good 50-year period, we have people like Herophilus and Erasistratus permitted not only to perform anatomical operations on corpses, but if we're to believe Celsus, even vivisection. Condemned criminals are handed over to be dissected alive. Now, this must account for the much more developed text that we see when we come to Celsus. That's the importance of Alexandria, I think.
Physicians came here from all over the Mediterranean world to teach and to study. And Natasha has followed in their footsteps to see if there's anything the ancient Greeks can still offer modern medicine. Recently, the remains of the original Ptolemaic University were uncovered. It's an enormous site, and over 2,000 years ago, would have offered thousands of scholars the opportunity to learn. This is one of the oval lecture rooms where the great physicians of the day would have come to teach anatomy. And the knowledge of anatomy, of course, is essential for plastic surgery. Natasha wants to know how much was actually understood at the time.
It was great being at the site of the old university, just imagining all the different academics and professors that would have been wandering around there. I just wish I could find out exactly what they were studying, what was their knowledge of anatomy at that stage? How much did they know about surgery?
The key to this was dissection, which in most early cultures was taboo. But in liberal Alexandria, sometime in the 3rd century BC, a young physician named Herophilus was given permission to dissect human bodies. His findings revolutionized all kinds of surgery, including plastic surgery.
Prior to Herophilus, no one had ever done systematic dissection of human cadavers. Herophilus achieved a remarkably detailed knowledge of the entire human body. For example, demonstrated the systematic anatomical distinction between arteries and veins. And perhaps most important, discovered the nerves and made the distinction between motor and sensory nerves, distinguished between 4 coats of the eye, discovered the ventricles of the brain and described them quite accurately.
Most of today's understanding of the body comes straight from Herophilus and the discoveries he made 2,000 years ago.
In the case of dissection, what is so extraordinary is that prior to Herophilus, no one had ever done systematic dissection of human cadavers. After him, it was never done again for another 15 centuries. In any culture, in any part of the world.
But it wasn't just dissection of cadavers. Herophilus was allowed to break an even bigger taboo. Carving up living humans, condemned criminals. Science was getting its own human sacrifice.
Systematic vivisectory experimentation is cutting open living human beings in order to observe the functions of the internal parts in a living being. The justification for this was said to be that no matter how well one knows the dead body is different from the living body.